The question of what endures, when a voice is silenced and laughter becomes a mere echo in the hollow chambers of memory, had settled upon Devendra Mishra's workshop like the fine grey dust of a Varanasi winter. It had been a full turn of seasons since Leela, his daughter, his music, his light, had been claimed by the fever that respected no artistry, no youth. Her sitar, a simple instrument he had made for her nimble fingers when she was but a girl, leaned in a corner, shrouded and silent, a mirror to the desolation in his own heart. Outside, the eternal city of Kashi pulsed with its chaotic symphony, the clang of temple bells, the calls of vendors, the mournful cries of gulls wheeling over the sacred Ganga, the distant drone of a boatman's song. But within the narrow, incense-scented confines of his ancestral workshop, where generations of Mishras had breathed life into wood and string, there was only a profound, suffocating silence. Devendra, a man whose 60 years had been etched onto his face not by time alone but by the meticulous devotion to his craft, now found his hands idle. These hands, gnarled as ancient banyan roots yet capable of coaxing divine melodies from inert matter, now trembled when they reached for a chisel. The unfinished carcasses of 3 sitars lay on their racks, their pale, unvarnished wood a reproach. He would trace the outline of a half-carved neck, the wood cool and impassive, and the image of Leela would swim before his eyes, her head bent in concentration, a stray lock of dark hair escaping her braid, her fingers, like brown birds, dancing over the frets. She had been more than his daughter. She was the inheritor of his soul's language, the vibrant new raga born from his ancient melody. Baba, her voice, melodic even in speech, would echo in his mind, music must have wings. It cannot be afraid of the sky. He had, in his cautious love, perhaps clipped those wings with his insistence on pure tradition, his fear of the new tunes that danced in her eyes. The regret was a constant, dull ache. Rohan, barely a man at 17, was a ghost in this mausoleum of grief. Apprenticed to the great Devendra Mishra a month before Leela's passing, he had dreamed of learning the secrets of the divine instrument. Instead, he swept floors that gathered no new wood shavings, arranged tools Devendra no longer sought, and practiced his own rudimentary scales on a battered sitar in the furthest, darkest corner of the workshop, his notes tentative, almost apologetic, lest they disturbed the Ustad's sorrow. He revered the name, the legacy, but this silent, hollow-eyed man was a stranger, a monument to a loss Rohan could only guess at. Ustad ji, he would whisper each morning, his voice barely audible above the street sounds. A curt nod, a flicker of haunted eyes, was often the only reply. Current part characters, 2970. Total characters, 2970. Priya, whose Veena sang with the wisdom of the ages from her small courtyard across the alley, was the only soul who dared to pierce Devendra's self-imposed isolation. A widow herself, she understood the contours of grief. She would bring him a small offering of food, a few soft rotis, a spoonful of dal, and sit with him in the shared silence. Sometimes humming a wordless bhajan, its ancient cadences a thread of continuity in a fractured world. The river flows on, Devendra Bai, she said one evening, her voice as soothing as the Ganga's murmur. Leela's melody is not extinguished, it merely waits for a new instrument, a new breath. He had looked at her then, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before the familiar curtain of sorrow descended again. But her words, perhaps, had planted a seed in the barren soil of his heart. The change began subtly, as the pre-monsoon heat began to build, pressing down on Varanasi with a suffocating weight. Priya, with gentle insistence, had suggested he sort through Leela's few belongings. It is a way to honor her memory, Devendra Bai, not to erase it. And so, with trembling hands, he had opened the small wooden trunk that held the remnants of her young life, simple cotton saris that still held the faint scent of jasmine and sandalwood. A handful of brightly colored glass bangles, chipped from her energetic movements. A small string of tulsi prayer beads. And then, nestled beneath a faded silk scarf, he found it, a small, cloth-bound notebook. He had forgotten its existence. Leela had always been one for scribbling, thoughts, observations, fragments of melodies. With a heart constricted by both love and dread, he opened it. The pages, filled with her graceful, sloping Devanagari, were a window into her soul. There were her musings on the ragas she was mastering, her deep understanding of their emotional cores. But more, there were sketches, intricate and surprisingly technical, of sitars. She had analyzed their construction, questioned traditional forms, dreamed of modifications. The tumba, one entry read, must be seasoned not just by time, but by the sun and the moon, to absorb the cosmos before it can sing of it. Another page showed a detailed drawing of a sitar's headstock, not the traditional swan or peacock, but a delicate, unfurling lotus bud, a symbol of purity and spiritual awakening. Beneath it, in her clear hand, was written, Leela Veena, a voice for the soul's music. He read of her frustration with the limitations of even his finest instruments, her yearning for a sitar that could capture the subtle shrutis, the microtonal nuances that were the very essence of a raga's personality, notes that often got lost in the compromise of fixed frets. She had theorized about a different tempering for the metal of the strings, a slight variation in the bridge's curvature to enhance the ethereal shimmer of the sympathetic strings. It was not the work of a mere student, but of a visionary, a young mind steeped in tradition yet bold enough to imagine its evolution. Current part characters, 3326. Total characters, 6,296. A particular passage seized him. Baba says tradition is a mighty fortress, protecting the purity of our music. But what if it is also a river needs strong banks. Yes, but it must also flow, adapt to the landscape, find new paths to the ocean. Can a sitar not be both fortress and river? Devendra's breath caught in his throat. It was as if Leela were in the room, her presence palpable, her voice gentle but insistent, challenging him, comforting him. The weight on his chest, the suffocating grief that had paralyzed him for a year, seemed to lighten. Just a fraction, allowing a sliver of possibility to enter. He saw her not just as the daughter he had lost, but as the artist she was becoming, the innovator whose journey had been cut short. He clutched the notebook, its worn fabric cool against his skin, the Leela Veena. Her dream. His hands, those idle, grieving hands, began to itch with a forgotten sensation, the urge to create, to shape, to give form to the formless. A single, painful tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek, but it was not a tear of despair alone. It was a tear of catharsis, of a nascent, fragile hope. He would build her sitar. He would build the Leela Veena. It would be his final masterpiece, his lament, his love song to her memory. The dust motes in the workshop, caught in a stray sunbeam, seemed to dance, no longer a shroud, but a glittering veil of anticipation. The silence was still there, but now, it held the faintest echo of a note waiting to be born. The decision, once it crystallized, infused Devendra with a quiet urgency. The workshop, his sanctuary turned tomb, began to stir with renewed life. The first order of business was the wood. For the Leela Veena, only the most exceptional, most resonant materials would suffice. He remembered his father, and his father's father. Speaking of a specific type of tune wood, Tunna Devadaru, the divine tune, found only in certain old-growth forests, seasoned by 100 monsoons and 100 scorching summers. And the tumba, the gourd resonator, it had to be a locky of perfect symmetry, dried over years until its skin was parchment thin yet resilient, its hollow promising a universe of sound. Rohan, Devendra announced one morning, his voice still bearing the rasp of disuse but now threaded with a steely resolve that made the young apprentice straighten his shoulders. We are going on a journey. There is wood to be found, and a gourd that dreams of music. Rohan's surprise was quickly masked by a surge of eagerness. For the first time in a year, Ustad Ji was truly seeing him, speaking not from the depths of his sorrow but from the core of his being as a master craftsman. Their quest took them away from the familiar labyrinth of Varanasi's ghats and galas, into the dusty, sun-baked countryside of Uttar Pradesh. Devendra, who had seemed to age a decade in the past year, now moved with a renewed vigor, his eyes scanning the landscape, his hands occasionally reaching out to touch the bark of a promising tree, only to shake his head and move on. He spoke more during those few days than he had in the entire preceding year. Not of his grief directly, but of his own apprenticeship, of the subtle wisdom of the trees, of Leela's uncanny ability as a child to discern the singing quality of a piece of wood just by tapping it. Rohan listened, absorbing every word, every nuance, feeling the profound connection between his ustad, the natural world, and the sacred art he served. After days of searching, guided by an intuition honed over a lifetime, Devendra found it, a massive, ancient tune tree that had fallen naturally, its wood already partially seasoned by the elements, lying in a sun-dappled clearing, almost as if waiting for him. Its grain was tight and straight, promising strength and extraordinary resonance. He ran his hand over its weathered surface, a look of profound communion on his face. "This one," he murmured, "this one remembers Leela's ancestors." The gourd, equally perfect, they found in a remote village, from an old woman whose family had cultivated them for generations, selecting only the most flawless specimens for musical instruments. It was light as a feather, yet its shape was a perfect sphere, its skin smooth and unblemished. Transporting these precious materials back to the workshop was a slow, laborious process by bullock cart, each jolt on the uneven track making Devendra wince as if the wood itself felt the impact. But his eyes, when he looked at his acquisitions, shone with a craftsman's love and a father's tender hope. Current part characters, 3998. Total characters, 10,294. Back in the workshop, the silence was definitively broken. The rasp of Devendra's well-oiled saw cutting through the aged tune, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his chisel. The focused hiss of Rohan's plane shaping a smaller piece under his master's exacting gaze, these were the sounds of rebirth. Devendra worked with a reverence that transformed mere labor into a sacred ritual. Every measurement was precise, every cut considered. He handled the wood as if it were alive, which, to him, it was. He was a demanding teacher, pushing Rohan to his limits. "Feel the wood, boy, do not just fight it," he would snap if Rohan's stroke was clumsy. "The chisel is your voice, not your fist. It must persuade the wood to yield its song, not tear it out by force." Yet, beneath the gruffness, there was a new patience, a willingness to explain the why behind the how. He began to share snippets from Leela's notebook, pointing out her drawings, her insightful observations. "Your Didi Leela," he would say, a catch in his voice, "she had the mind of a master. Even then, she saw the music within the silence." Rohan, in turn, redoubled his efforts, his initial awe of the ustad now mingled with a fierce loyalty and a dawning understanding of the profound significance of the Leela Veena. He learned to read the subtle cues in Devendra's posture, the tightening of his jaw that signaled a critical step, the rare, almost imperceptible smile that meant a piece of wood had yielded its form perfectly. He spent his evenings practicing the sitar with a newfound dedication, trying to understand the music that would one day fill the instrument taking shape before his eyes. The shaping of the tumba, the hollowing of the long, elegant neck, the meticulous preparation for the intricate joinery, each process was unhurried, deliberate. Devendra often worked late into the night. By the flickering light of a single oil lamp, the city sounds muted, his focus absolute. He would sometimes pause, his hand resting on the smooth wood, and Rohan would see his lips move, as if in silent conversation with the spirit of Leela. Or perhaps with the emerging soul of the instrument itself. It was during one such late-night session, as Devendra was explaining the complex acoustic principles behind the traditional placement of the sitar's main bridge. The Godi, that the shadow of Mr. Alastair Finch first fell upon their endeavor. Current part characters, 3037. Total characters, 13331. Mr. Finch, the British colonial administrator with a penchant for collecting Indian culture, had not been idle. Whispers of Ustad Devendra Mishra's return to his craft, and the singular instrument he was rumoured to be building, had reached his ears through the intricate network of informants and local officials he cultivated. The prospect of acquiring such a piece, crafted by a renowned master in the twilight of his career, and imbued with a poignant personal story, was irresistible to Finch's acquisitive nature. It would be a jewel in the collection he was assembling for the proposed Imperial Arts Exhibition, a testament to his own discerning eye and the Empire's benevolent stewardship of its colonial subjects' heritage. He chose his moment carefully, arriving at the workshop one humid afternoon when the heat had driven most of the alley's inhabitants indoors. He was dressed, as always, in his immaculate white linen suit, his pith helmet casting a shadow over his narrow, intelligent face. Ustad Mishra, he began, his Hindi modulated to a tone of polite, academic interest. I was so very gratified to hear that your genius is once again finding expression. The city has missed your artistry. Devendra, who was meticulously sanding the curved neck of the Leela Veena, paused, his hands stilling on the wood. He nodded a curt acknowledgement, his eyes guarded. Rohan, sensing his ustad's discomfort, stood a little straighter, a silent sentinel. Finch's gaze, however, was already fixed on the instrument taking shape on Devendra's workbench. It was still raw, unadorned, yet even in its unfinished state, there was an elegance, a perfection of line, that spoke of mastery. Ah, Finch breathed, stepping closer, his eyes alight with a collector's gleam. This is the one, is it not, the tribute instrument I have heard tell of? Remarkable. Truly remarkable. He reached out a hand, as if to touch the wood, but Devendra shifted slightly. A subtle, protective movement, and Finch's hand dropped. It is a work in progress, Sahib, Devendra said, his voice neutral. Indeed, indeed, Finch mused, circling the workbench slowly. And one, I trust, that will eventually find its rightful place among the great treasures of Indian art. I am, as you may know, involved in curating a rather significant exhibition. We are seeking pieces that represent the pinnacle of indigenous craftsmanship. An instrument such as this, with its poignant history, would be a centerpiece. It would bring you great renown, Ustad Ji. And naturally, the Crown is prepared to offer a most generous honorarium for such a contribution to cultural understanding. Current part characters, 2818. Total characters, 16149. Devendra felt a familiar coldness creep into his heart. Renown. Honorarium. Finch's words, couched in the language of appreciation, felt like a profanation. He thought of Leela's notebook. Her pure, passionate engagement with music, her dreams for an instrument that would sing her soul's song. This was not a specimen to be tagged and displayed, a quaint example of native craft. This sitar, Sahib, Devendra said, his voice quiet but resonant as the wood beneath his hands, is not being made for an exhibition. It is not being made for renown, or for an honorarium. He met Finch's gaze directly. It is an offering. A father's offering to his daughter's spirit. Its value cannot be measured in rupees, nor its purpose dictated by committees. Finch's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. A noble sentiment, Ustad Ji. Truly. But such unique artistry also has a duty to the wider world, to posterity. Locked away in a small workshop, heard by few. Is that a fitting destiny for such a masterpiece? The Empire provides opportunities for your genius to be recognized on a global stage. He paused, letting his words sink in. Think of it, Mishra. Your name, your daughter's memory. Celebrated far beyond the confines of Varanasi. Rohan, listening intently, felt a surge of anger at Finch's condescending tone, his assumption of authority. He saw the muscle twitch in his ustad's jaw. The only audience I seek for this sitar, Sahib, Devendra replied, his voice still low but unyielding, is the one for whom it is intended. And she will hear it, wherever she may be. Finch's expression hardened. The polite mask of the academic was slipping, revealing the steel of the colonial administrator beneath. I admire your devotion, Ustad Ji. But there are realities to consider. The Provincial Arts Committee has a mandate. And I, as its representative in this district, have certain responsibilities. He gave a thin smile. I shall call again when your work is further progressed. Perhaps then you will have had time to reflect on the significant advantages of cooperation. He gave a curt nod, and with another lingering, proprietary glance at the Leela Veena, he departed, leaving an oppressive silence in his wake. Devendra sagged slightly, the brief confrontation draining him. He picked up his sanding block, his movements heavy. The Leela Veena, his sanctuary, his tribute, was now also a point of contention, a potential battleground. The fight to create was now intertwined with a fight to protect. Current part characters, 3018. Total characters, 19167. The shadow of Mr. Finch's ambition spurred Devendra to delve deeper into his work, to pour even more of his essence into the Leela Veena. He began to share Leela's notebook more openly with Rohan. Not just her sketches, but her words, her philosophies. Listen to this, Rohan, he would say, his finger tracing a line of script. A raga is not a set of rules, but a pathway to an emotion. The sitar must be the traveler's faithful companion, sturdy and true, yet sensitive to every nuance of the journey. She understood, even then, that technique without heart is an empty vessel. Rohan, in turn, became more than just an apprentice. He became a confidant, a guardian of the emerging masterpiece alongside his ustad. He saw the immense love and the profound grief that fueled Devendra's every action, and his youthful impatience transformed into a deep, protective loyalty. He took upon himself the task of deflecting casual visitors, of managing the small day-to-day affairs of the workshop, allowing Devendra to immerse himself fully in the intricate creation. He even began, tentatively at first, to offer his own observations, born from his hours of practice and his close study of Leela's notes. Ustad Ji, he ventured one day, Didi Leela wrote here about the angle of the tarafdar pegs, the sympathetic strings. If we were to alter it just so, perhaps it would allow them to sing more freely with the Vilambic Gad of Raga Yaman. Devendra looked at the boy, truly looked at him, and saw not just an apprentice, but a budding artist, a mind engaging with the same passion that had burned so brightly in Leela. A rare, gentle smile touched Devendra's lips. Show me, Rohan. Show me what you mean. Together, they experimented, master and student, exploring Leela's legacy, pushing the boundaries of tradition not in defiance, but in loving evolution. Priya remained their steadfast anchor. She brought them nourishing food, her quiet presence a comfort. She listened as Devendra spoke of Leela's ideas taking shape in the wood, of Rohan's growing understanding, and she brought news of Finch, who was becoming more persistent, more vocal in his intent to acquire the sitar. He had been heard boasting at the European Club of the exquisite native artifact he would soon secure for the Imperial exhibition. He is a man accustomed to getting what he wants, Devendra Bai, Priya warned, her brow creased with concern. His appreciation is a form of hunger. Be vigilant. The work on the Lila Vina progressed. The delicate mother-of-pearl inlay, tracing patterns of lotus vines along the dark wood of the neck, was painstakingly set. Each of the 20 frets was tied with vibrant red silk thread. Their positions calculated to a hair's breadth to achieve the perfect intonation for Lila's beloved shrutis. The tumba, the gourd resonator, was attached, its pale, smooth surface glowing in the lamplight, waiting to be adorned with the lotus bud carving Lila had sketched. Current part characters, 3,230. Total characters, 22397. One evening, as Devendra was meticulously carving the fine veins on a lotus petal at the headstock, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, a breathlessness that made him drop his chisel. He stumbled, clutching at the workbench. Rohan, instantly by his side, helped him to a low stool, his face etched with alarm. "Ustad ji, are you unwell?" Devendra waved a dismissive hand, though his face was pale and beaded with sweat. "It is nothing. Just a moment's fatigue." But the tremor in his hands, the sudden fragility he felt, frightened him. What if he could not finish? What if Lila's Veena remained a silent, incomplete promise? The thought was a colder fear than any Finch could inspire. Rohan, seeing the shadow in his master's eyes, fetched Priya. She came quickly, her calm presence a balm. She made Devendra rest, prepared a soothing herbal brew, and spoke to him in low, comforting tones, not of the Sitar, but of the changing seasons, of the resilience of the human spirit, of Leela's enduring light. For several days, Devendra was forced to rest. Rohan kept the workshop tidy, practiced quietly, and tended to his ustad with a son's devotion. It was during this period of forced inactivity that Devendra, propped against bolsters, revisited Leela's notebook with a new intensity. He read her words not just as a craftsman, but as a father seeking his daughter. He found passages he had overlooked, reflections on courage, on facing adversity, on the enduring power of music to heal and connect. Even when the singer is gone, Leela had written, the song remains, if only there is one heart left to hear it. One instrument left to give it voice. The words resonated deep within him. He would not falter. He would finish. For Leela. For the song. His strength returned, slowly, but with it came an even deeper resolve. He worked with less feverish intensity now, but with a profound, focused calm. The final stages of the sitar's creation were imbued with this quiet strength. The intricate bridge, the jawari, which determined the instrument's unique buzzing timbre, was shaped and filed with microscopic precision, the thread delicately woven between the bone and the wood. The sympathetic strings, thin as spun moonlight, were strung and tuned, their collective hum a promise of the rich harmonics to come. Finally, the main playing strings were stretched across the long neck. Devendra, his hands steady once more, began the meticulous process of tuning. Each turn of the pegs was deliberate. His ear inclined, listening for the perfect tension, the precise pitch. Rohan watched, holding his breath. Priya stood quietly in the doorway. Then, with a silence that felt more profound than any sound, Devendra held the Leela Veena in his lap. He closed his eyes for a moment, a silent prayer on his lips. He touched the strings. The first note that emerged was not a pluck, but a bloom. It unfurled into the hushed workshop, a sound so pure, so resonant, so achingly beautiful that it seemed to hang suspended in the air, shimmering like a tear. It was deep and sonorous, yet possessed a crystalline clarity, a voice-like quality that was unmistakably Leela, her warmth, her spirit, her very essence captured in the vibrating strings. Tears streamed down Devendra's face, unchecked. Rohan felt his own eyes prickle. Priya covered her mouth, her expression one of awe and profound sorrow. The Leela Veena was not just an instrument. It was a resurrection. It was love made audible. Current part characters, 3933. Total characters, 26330. The news of the Leela Veena's completion, and of its extraordinary voice, spread through Varanasi's musical community like wildfire. Musicians, scholars, and curious patrons made discreet inquiries, hoping for a chance to see, perhaps even hear, the instrument that old Ustad Devendra Mishra had poured his soul into. But Devendra kept the sitar close, playing it only for himself in the quiet hours of the dawn or late evening, a private communion with Leela's spirit. The music he coaxed from it was deeply personal, ragas filled with pathos and tender remembrance, melodies that seemed to map the landscape of his grief and his enduring love. Mr. Alastair Finch, however, was not one to be deterred by sentiment or discretion. His interest in the Leela Veena had only intensified with the reports of its unique quality. The Imperial Exhibition was drawing nearer, and he was determined that this prime specimen of native craftsmanship would be part of his curated collection, a testament to his own acumen and the Empire's cultural reach. He saw its acquisition as both a professional coup and a personal triumph. One humid monsoon afternoon, as thunder grumbled a prelude to the coming downpour, Finch arrived at Devendra's workshop. This time, his demeanor was less academic, more overtly official. He was flanked by two city constables. Their polished buttons glinting in the oppressive gloom, their presence a clear intimation of authority. In his hand, Finch carried a document, its official-looking seals prominent. Ustad Devendra Mishra, Finch announced, his voice crisp, brooking no argument. The time for polite requests is over. I have here an official requisition from the Provincial Arts Committee, countersigned by the district magistrate. He unfurled it with a snap. It authorizes the immediate acquisition of the sitar known as the Leela Veena, for purposes of cultural preservation and exhibition by the Crown. You will, of course, be compensated fairly, but the instrument is now under the official purview of the government. Devendra felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, but his face remained impassive. Rohan stepped forward, his young face flushed with anger. You cannot just take it. Sahib, it is not yours to requisition. Finch barely spared Rohan a glance. This is official government business, young man. Stand aside. He turned back to Devendra. Your cooperation will make this process smoother for all concerned. The constables are here merely to ensure an orderly transfer. Priya, who had anticipated such a move and had been keeping a worried watch, entered the workshop, her usual serenity replaced by a steely resolve. Mr. Finch, she said. Her voice clear and ringing despite its quietness. This is an outrage. This instrument is a sacred trust, a father's love made manifest. It is not a piece of government property to be seized at will. Current part characters, 2992. Total characters, 29322. Finch's lips thinned into a smile that did not reach his eyes. Madam Acharya, your sentiments are, as always, charmingly poetic. However, the law is the law. And the law, in this instance, serves a higher purpose, the preservation and wider appreciation of Indian artistry. This sitar is too important to be hidden away. He gestured to the constables. Kindly secure the instrument. The constables took a hesitant step forward. The workshop, already small, seemed to shrink further, the air thick with unspoken tension. Rohan placed himself protectively before the Leela Veena, which rested on its velvet cushion, its polished wood gleaming softly, an oasis of beauty in the encroaching ugliness. Devendra looked at the sitar, his creation, Leela's voice. He looked at Rohan's defiant stance, at Priya's unwavering support. A profound calm, born not of resignation but of an unshakable inner strength, settled over him. He had faced the abyss of grief and found his way back through this instrument. He would not let it be desecrated by ambition or arrogance. Slowly, with a dignity that seemed to fill the small space, Devendra walked towards the Leela. He did not look at Finch or the constables. His eyes were fixed on the instrument, his instrument, Leela's instrument. He lifted it gently, its familiar weight of comfort in his hands. He settled onto his small playing carpet, adjusting the sitar in his lap. Then, he closed his eyes and began to play. He did not begin with a polite, formal alap. Instead, a cascade of notes, sharp and clear as unsheathed steel, ripped through the tense silence. It was a raga of defiance, of courage, perhaps Durga, or a powerful, rarely heard warrior's invocation. The music was not soothing. It was a challenge, a declaration. The Leela Veena, in Devendra's hands, became a weapon of the spirit. The sympathetic strings resonated with a fierce, almost martial hum. The main strings sang of ancient valor, of battles fought for honor, for truth. The constables, who had been moving forward, stopped dead in their tracks, visibly startled by the unexpected power and intensity of the music. Finch's smug expression wavered, replaced by a look of disbelief, then annoyance. He opened his mouth to speak, to order the music to cease, but the sheer force of the sound seemed to push his words back down his throat. As Devendra played, his frail body seemed to draw strength from the instrument, from the music itself. His fingers, though gnarled, moved with a speed and precision that was astonishing. The music was raw, elemental, filled with an unyielding spirit. It spoke not just for Devendra, but for generations of artisans, for the sanctity of creation, for the inviolable bond between a father and his child. Outside, drawn by the extraordinary sound, so different from the gentle melodies usually heard from Devendra's workshop, a crowd began to gather in the narrow alley. Shopkeepers left their stalls, women paused in their errands, children fell silent. They pressed around the doorway, their faces rapt, listening to the ustad's unexpected battle cry. The air thrummed with the music, with a sense of rising tension, of a community bearing witness. Current part characters, 3349. Total characters, 32671. The raga reached its crescendo, a torrent of notes that seemed to shake the very foundations of the workshop. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music ceased. The final, powerful chord hung in the air, vibrating with an almost physical intensity, before slowly fading into a silence more profound than any before. Devendra opened his eyes. They blazed with a fire that Finch had not anticipated. The old, grieving craftsman was gone, replaced by an ustad in the truest sense of the word, a master. A guardian of his art. Into this charged silence, Priya's voice cut through, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Mr. Finch," she said, "you have heard the sitar speak. It speaks of matters beyond your official papers. It speaks of a connection that your government cannot requisition. To take this instrument now would not be an act of preservation. It would be an act of desecration. An offense against the spirit of Kashi itself, and against the memory of the child for whom it was made." An elder from the Musicians' Guild, Pundit Ram Narayan, who had pushed his way to the front of the crowd, nodded gravely. "Ustad Devendra Mishra is a jewel of our city, Sahib. His work is sacred to us. This Leela Veena is not a mere object. It is his heart. You will not take it." His voice, though quiet, resonated with the weight of community consensus. Other voices in the crowd murmured their assent. "He speaks truth, leave the ustad in peace." Finch looked from Devendra's unwavering gaze to Priya's resolute expression, to the faces in the crowd, no longer merely curious but now openly protective, almost hostile. The constables looked distinctly uncomfortable, unwilling to provoke a public disturbance over a musical instrument, however unique. The official document in Finch's hand suddenly felt very flimsy indeed. His carefully constructed narrative of benevolent cultural stewardship was crumbling in the face of this raw, authentic expression of art and communal solidarity. He was an administrator, a collector, not a brute. He knew when a situation had tipped beyond his control, when the cost of asserting his authority outweighed the prize. A flicker of frustration, then a carefully schooled mask of indifference, crossed his features. "It appears," Ustad G. Finch said, his voice tight with an effort at nonchalance, "that your instrument has strong local attachments." He made a small, dismissive gesture. "Perhaps another time, when its cultural significance can be assessed with less emotionalism." He gave a stiff nod to the constables. "There is nothing further for us here." Without another word, Mr. Alastair Finch turned and pushed his way through the silent, watchful crowd, his retreat far less dignified than his arrival. The constables followed hastily in his wake. As their figures disappeared down the alley, a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the onlookers. Then, someone started to clap, and soon the small workshop was filled with the sound of applause, a spontaneous tribute to Devendra's courage and the profound eloquence of the Leela Veena. Devendra, still cradling the sitar, inclined his head, a deep weariness suddenly settling upon him, but beneath it, a quiet, unassailable peace. Leela's song was safe. Current part characters, 3660. Total characters, 36331. The departure of Mr. Finch did not magically erase the colonial shadow, but it did affirm the power of art and community to resist its encroachment. In the days that followed, a new respect settled around Devendra and his workshop. Musicians and connoisseurs came, not with demands, but with humble requests to simply sit in the presence of the Leela Veena, perhaps to hear a few notes if the Ustad was so inclined. Devendra, his spirit lighter, his heart less burdened, occasionally acquiesced. He played not for show, but for sharing, for keeping Leela's memory vibrant. Priya became the sitar's first true audience beyond its creator. One tranquil evening, as jasmine perfumed the air and the first stars pricked the indigo sky, she brought her veena to Devendra's courtyard. They played together, a soft duet, the deep, resonant voice of the Leela Veena intertwining with the sweeter, more ancient tones of Priya's instrument. It was a conversation between friends, a balm for old sorrows, a quiet celebration of continuity. Rohan listened, his heart full, understanding that he was witnessing something profound, a weaving of past, present, and future through the sacred threads of music. Devendra now dedicated himself fully to Rohan's tutelage. He poured into the young man all the knowledge he possessed, the intricate mathematics of fret placement, the subtle art of shaping the jawari to achieve the perfect timbre, the deep spiritual understanding of the ragas and their association with the cycles of nature and human emotion. He held nothing back. He shared Leela's notebook in its entirety, encouraging Rohan not just to copy, but to understand, to question, to find his own voice within the tradition. Leela dreamed of a music that could bridge worlds, Rohan, Devendra said one afternoon, as they worked together on a new sitar, one for Rohan himself. She respected the ancient foundations. But she was not afraid to build a new archway. You must be the same. Honor the roots, but do not fear the branches. Rohan, no longer a hesitant boy but a confident young artisan, his hands already showing the skill and sensitivity of a true craftsman, absorbed his ustad's wisdom. He knew he was not just learning to make sitars. He was becoming a custodian of a sacred legacy, a legacy now intrinsically linked with the spirit of Leela and the extraordinary instrument that bore her name. The Leela Veena was rarely played in public, but its legend grew. It was said that its music could heal, that it could evoke the presence of the divine, that it held the very soul of Kashi within its resonant chamber. Devendra made no such claims. For him, it was simply Leela's voice, a constant, comforting presence in his life. Current part characters, 2965. Total characters, 39296. Years passed. Devendra grew old, his movements slower, his hands more gnarled, but his eyes retained their serene light. Rohan became a master craftsman in his own right, his sitars sought after for their fine workmanship and their beautiful tone. Each one bearing the unmistakable stamp of Devendra's teaching, yet also hinting at Rohan's own emerging style, one that respectfully incorporated some of the innovative ideas Leela had first dreamed of. The workshop, once a place of silent sorrow, now hummed with the quiet activity of creation, the scent of tuned wood and varnish of familiar comfort. Students now came to Rohan, and he, in turn, passed on the knowledge, the discipline, and the reverence for the art that Devendra had instilled in him. One cool evening, during the festival of Diwali, the city of Varanasi blazed with the light of thousands of earthen lamps. Devendra, frail but peaceful, sat propped against bolsters in his small courtyard, the air filled with the scent of marigolds and incense, the distant sound of firecrackers, and the sweet, clear notes of a sitar. Rohan was playing. He was playing the Leela Veena. He played a raga of celebration, of light overcoming darkness, of joy and renewal. The music, rich and luminous, flowed out from the workshop, weaving its magic through the festive night. It was a sound that was both ancient and new, a melody that carried the weight of tradition and the lightness of innovation. It was Leela's spirit, Devendra's love, and Rohan's future, all singing together in perfect harmony. Devendra closed his eyes, a gentle smile gracing his lips. The Leela Veena was more than just a sitar. It was a testament to the enduring power of love to transform grief into beauty, a monument not of stone, but of resonant sound, ensuring that a beloved voice, once silenced, would continue to sing through the ages. His offering was complete. The song remained. Current part characters, 2189. Total characters, 41485. The story above is approximately 41,485 characters. To reach the 100,000 character target, I would need to significantly expand upon all sections, adding more detailed scenes, internal monologues, dialogues, subplots, and character interactions. The current version provides the core narrative arc as per the outline but is more concise. I will proceed by expanding the existing narrative to meet the character count requirement, focusing on adding depth and detail to each part of the story as outlined in PHN 3. Y tuong va don y cho cau chien moi doak sang tao dua tren cau chien goc. Let us restart and aim for the full length, focusing on expansion from the beginning. The air in Devendra Mishra's workshop, usually vibrant with the scent of freshly worked tuned wood and the lingering sweetness of shellac, had curdled into a stale miasma of dust and desolation. How does a man measure time when its passage is marked only by the deepening of sorrow? For Devendra, it had been 12 relentless moons since Leela, his daughter, his sun, his moon, his every raga, had been snatched away by the virulent cholera that had wept through the riverside ghats of Kashi. Her own sitar, a nimble instrument he had crafted for her small, eager hands when she was but a child of 7, now stood sentinel in the darkest corner, draped in a faded cotton cloth, an almost too perfect metaphor for the shroud that had fallen over his own creative spirit. Outside these mud brick walls, life in Varanasi, the city eternal, throbbed with its usual, unyielding cacophony. The pre-dawn conch shells from 100 temples, the rhythmic chanting of priests. The argumentative calls of boatmen vying for pilgrims on the Ganga's sacred waters, the laughter of children chasing stray dogs through the labyrinthine alleys, it all washed against the closed shutters of Devendra's workshop like an indifferent tide. But within, where for 50 years the divine alchemy of transforming wood and string into soul-stirring music had been his life's breath, there was only silence. A silence so profound, it had its own weight, its own suffocating texture. Devendra, now past his 60th year, carried his age not in the stoop of his shoulders, for he was still a man of spare, upright build, but in the hollows beneath his eyes and the tremor that sometimes afflicted his famed hands. These hands, their knuckles gnarled like the roots of the ancient peepal tree in the temple courtyard, their skin stained with the patinas of countless varnishes and imbued with an almost sentient knowledge of wood grain and tonal possibilities, now lay listless in his lap or moved only to perform the most basic tasks of survival. 3 sitars, commissioned before Leela's departure, lay like accusing specters on their felt-lined racks, their necks uncarved, their tumbas unadorned, their silence a constant, bitter reproach. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when sleep offered no refuge, he would rise and trace the smooth, cool curve of an unfinished gourd, the phantom sensation of Leela's small hand slipping into his as they walked by the river filling him with an ache so profound it stole his breath. She had been the crescendo of his life's composition, her laughter, the tinkling of gumgros. Her intellect, sharp and intuitive as the correct placement of a fret. Baba, he could still hear her voice, melodic as the tanpra's drone. The old ragas hold the wisdom of the earth, but surely new melodies are born in the sky every day, must we not try to catch them, he, in his steadfast devotion to the purity of tradition. The precise grammar of the ancient forms, had often cautioned her against too much innovation, too eager a flight. The foundations must be strong, baby, before the walls can reach for the heavens. Now, the memory of his own well-intentioned conservatism felt like a betrayal of her incandescent spirit. He had wanted to protect her, to ground her. Instead, he felt as if he had tethered a soaring bird. Current part characters, 3683. Total characters, 3683. Rohan, a youth of 17 summers, had arrived at the workshop's threshold a mere month before the shadows fell, his heart alight with dreams of mastering the sitar under the legendary Devendra Mishra. The Ustad's name was spoken with a reverence usually reserved for demigods in the hushed inner circles of Kashi's music gharanas. What Rohan found instead was a crumbling monument to grief. For a year, he had navigated the Ustad's sorrow with the tentative caution of one treading on sacred, fragile ground. His duties were simple, to sweep the ever-present dust that seemed to emanate from the city's very soul and settle with particular insistence in places of sorrow. To keep the Ustad's tools clean and ordered, though they lay mostly untouched. To fetch water from the communal well. In the late afternoons, when the Ustad retreated into a silence so profound it seemed to absorb all sound, Rohan would take his own battered, hand-me-down sitar to the furthest corner of the workshop. There, amidst the stacked gourds and seasoning planks of wood, he would practice the elementary sargams and paltas Devendra's father had taught him as a child, his notes hesitant, almost apologetic, careful not to disturb the Ustad's fragile peace, yet unable to completely silence the music that yearned within him. Each morning, he would offer a respectful pranam, Ustad ji, his voice barely a whisper. Most days, the only acknowledgement was a slight inclination of Devendra's head, his eyes fixed on some invisible horizon beyond the grime-streaked window, a landscape of memory only he could see. Priya Devi, a Veena player whose artistry was as deep and serene as the Ganga in winter, was perhaps the only thread connecting Devendra to the world of the living. Her own husband had journeyed to the pyres of Manikarnika Ghat many years ago, and she carried her widowhood not as a burden, but with a quiet dignity that resonated with Devendra's own unspoken pain. Her small house, its courtyard fragrant with jasmine and tulsi, was just across the narrow, winding alley. Almost daily, she would bring a small brass tiffin carrier containing a modest meal, a few perfectly puffed rotis, a spoonful of nourishing dal, a sliver of lime pickle. She rarely spoke much during these visits, understanding that grief has its own language, often one of profound silence. Sometimes, as Devendra sat staring, his food untouched, she would hum a timeless bhajan, a melody so ancient it seemed to carry the collective sighs and prayers of generations. Her presence was a gentle pressure, a reminder that life, however battered, persisted. The river continues its journey to the sea, Devindrabai, she might say softly, her voice like the lowest string of her veena. Even after the storm, the waters find their course. Leela's music is not lost. It has merely changed its form, become part of the eternal sound. He would offer no reply, but sometimes, after she had gone, he would find himself absently tapping a forgotten rhythm on the edge of his workbench, a fleeting echo of the artist he once was. Current part characters, 3448. Total characters, 7131. The monsoon was still a distant promise, a moist yearning in the hot, dry winds that swirled dust from the Ghats and through the city's arteries, when Priya made her gentle suggestion. Devindrabai, she began one evening, as she collected the previous day's untouched tiffin, it has been a year. Perhaps it is time to look at Leela's things, not to forget, never to forget, but to remember with love, to hold her essence close in a different way. He recoiled inwardly. Leela's small trunk, tucked away in the alcove where she slept, was a Pandora's box of pain he dared not open. Yet, Priya's eyes held no judgment. Only a compassionate understanding. It is a way to be with her, she added softly. The objects she touched, the clothes she wore, they hold her warmth, her energy. And so, one sweltering afternoon, while the city outside slept in a heat-induced torpor, Devendra found himself kneeling before the small, carved wooden trunk. His hands, those master craftsman's hands, trembled like an apprentice's. The brass latch, stiff from disuse, finally yielded with a reluctant click. The scent that arose was faint but achingly familiar. Sandalwood, jasmine, the clean smell of sun-dried cotton, Leela's scent. Inside lay her simple treasures, a few brightly colored cotton saris, folded with her characteristic neatness. A small lacquered box containing a tangled collection of glass bangles. Their vibrant hues a stark contrast to the grey landscape of his current existence. A string of Rudraksh beads he had given her after her sacred thread ceremony. And then, beneath a carefully pressed silk shawl, its peacock blue faded with time, he saw it, a small, unassuming notebook, its cover made of rough, homespun cloth, tied with a simple cotton string. He had given it to her years ago, an afterthought, a place for her to jot down her lessons, the complex structures of the ragas. He had not known then that it would become a repository of her dreams, a secret garden of her burgeoning genius. With a heart constricted by a grief so fresh it felt as if Leela had departed only yesterday, he untied the string and opened the cover. The pages were filled with her script, elegant, sloping Devanagari, interspersed with surprisingly detailed sketches and musical notations. He read, and as he read, the world outside, the oppressive heat, the suffocating silence of his workshop, all receded. He was drawn into Leela's mind, into her vibrant, questing spirit. She wrote of the ragas not as dry, academic exercises, but as living entities, each with its own personality, its own secrets. Raga Marwa, one entry mused, is not just the sunset. It is the ache of beauty that knows it must fade. The longing for what is just beyond reach. Then came the sketches of sitars, not copies of existing instruments, but new forms, subtle innovations. She had pondered the optimal curvature of the dandi, the long neck. For perfect string tension and effortless playability, she had theorized about the seasoning of the tumba, the gourd resonator, writing, the tumba must be a womb, absorbing the vibrations of the earth, the sun, the moon. For many seasons, before it can give birth to true sound. Her insights were astonishing, a blend of inherited wisdom and intuitive brilliance. Current part characters, 3756. Total characters, 10887. He turned a page and his breath caught. There, sketched with remarkable precision, was a sitar of exquisite grace. Its lines were traditional, yet there was a lightness, an almost ethereal quality to its proportions. The headstock, the cirrus, was not the customary peacock or swan, but a delicately rendered, unfurling lotus bud, each petal finely veined. Beneath this beautiful drawing, in Leela's clear, confident hand, were two words, Leela Veena. And below that, a single, poignant sentence, an instrument that can weep with the sorrow of separation, and sing with the joy of reunion, a voice for the soul's unspoken music. Devendra's vision blurred. It was as if Leela herself were there, her presence as real as the notebook in his trembling hands, her voice whispering her deepest desire. This was not just a sketch. It was a testament, a legacy, a plea. A wave of emotion, so powerful it threatened to consume him, washed through his being, grief, regret, a fierce, protective love, and something else, something he had not felt in a lifetime it seemed. A spark. A tiny, fragile spark of purpose. He saw her face before him, not as the still, pale child on her funeral pyre, but as the vibrant, laughing girl who had filled his life with music. He heard her voice, not in lament, but in eager anticipation. Baba, will you make it for me, will you make my Leela Veena? A sob, a sound torn from the very depths of his soul, escaped him. He pressed the notebook to his chest, its rough cloth a strange comfort. Yes. Yes, my child. I will make it. I will make your Leela Veena. It will be my final raga, my offering, my prayer. The silence in the workshop remained, but its quality had changed. It was no longer empty. It was pregnant with the promise of a sound yet to be born, a melody waiting to be coaxed from the heart of grief into the light of creation. The dust motes, caught in the single shaft of light piercing the gloom, no longer seemed like a shroud. They danced, like nascent notes, like shimmering possibilities. The decision to craft the Leela Veena was a silent vow, a covenant made not with any god, but with the cherished spirit of his daughter. It infused Devendra with a purpose that was almost terrifying in its intensity. The lethargy that had encased him like a silkworm's cocoon began to crack, to fall away, revealing a core of tempered steel he had forgotten he possessed. His first quest was for the materials, a pilgrimage in itself. For an instrument intended to be Leela's voice, only the most sacred, most resonant elements would suffice. His mind, long clouded, now cleared with the sharp focus of a master craftsman embarking upon his magnum opus. He recalled the hushed reverence with which his own Ustad, and his Ustad's Ustad before him, had spoken of Tana Devadaru, the divine tune, a timbre so rare, so imbued with acoustic potential, that it was said to sing even before the chisel touched it. It grew only in specific, hidden groves, protected by ancient spirits, its wood seasoned not merely by years, but by centuries of sun, rain, and the earth's slow breathing. And the tumba, the gourd resonator, it had to be a Brahman Laki, perfectly symmetrical, unblemished, dried for no less than 7 monsoons, its skin as thin and resonant as a temple drum. Rohan, Devendra announced one dawn, as the first tentative calls of the temple priests drifted over the awakening city. His voice, though still bearing the huskiness of sorrow, held a new timbre, a resonant hum that made the apprentice look up from his sweeping with startled attention. Gather your necessities. We leave at sunrise. There is wood that calls to us, and a gourd that holds a silent song. Rohan's heart leaped. For a year, he had felt like a shadow in a house of mourning. Now, the Ustad was not just speaking to him, but including him. This was more than an errand. It felt like an initiation. Ji, Ustad Ji, he managed, his voice thick with an emotion he could not quite name. Their journey was an unfolding map of Devendra's past, a retracing of steps once taken with his own father, and later, with Leela herself. They left the familiar chaos of Varanasi's ghats. The clatter of its looms, the perpetual scent of incense and marigolds, and ventured into the stark, sun-scorched plains of Uttar Pradesh. As they traveled by slow bullock cart, its wooden wheels groaning a rhythmic complaint against the rutted tracks, Devendra began to speak. He spoke of the different woods, their characters, their souls. He pointed to a gnarled neem tree, its leaves a bitter medicine. This wood is for strength, for endurance, Rohan. It will hold the frame, but it will not sing. Later, a slender shisham, its dark heartwood prized for furniture. This one has beauty, but its voice is muted, too dense for the lightness Leela's music requires. He spoke of Leela's uncanny childhood gift for identifying the musicality of a piece of timber simply by tapping it with her small knuckles, her ear pressed close. Her expression one of profound concentration. She heard the raga within the raw wood, boy. A gift from Saraswati herself. Rohan listened, not merely with his ears, but with his entire being, absorbing the ustad's words like thirsty earth drinks the first rain. He saw the landscape transform through Devendra's eyes. Every tree, every plant, imbued with a hidden potential, a secret song. He began to understand that for his master, sitar making was not a craft, but a form of yoga. A spiritual discipline, a way of communing with the divine essence of creation. Current part characters, 3883. Total characters, 14770. After 3 days of arduous travel, guided by Devendra's fading memories and an unshakable intuition, they reached a secluded grove, a forgotten pocket of ancient forest untouched by the woodcutter's axe. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, dappling the forest floor where the air was cool and moist, smelling of damp earth and unknown blossoms. Devendra moved through the trees like a wraith, his hand brushing against their ancient bark, his head cocked as if listening to their silent colloquy. Finally, before a colossal toon tree that had evidently fallen in some long-ago storm, its massive trunk already half submerged in the rich humus, he stopped. Its exposed wood, weathered to a silvery gray, showed a grain so tight, so straight, it seemed to vibrate with contained energy. "This is the one," Devendra whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The Devadaru. It has waited for us. It has waited for Leela." The gourd, the perfect Brahman Laki, they found not in nature, but in the keeping of an old woman in a remote village, a woman whose family, for generations, had been the hereditary cultivators of gourd specifically for the great instrument makers of Kashi. She led them to a darkened shed where hundreds of gourds hung from the rafters, each one a pale moon in the gloom. She seemed to understand Devendra's quest without him uttering more than a few words. After careful examination, tapping each one gently, listening to its hollow echo, she selected a single specimen. It was flawless, a perfect sphere, its skin smooth and taut as a drum. Its lightness belying its size. "This one," she said, her voice a dry rustle like autumn leaves, "this one has heard the music of the stars. It will sing for your daughter." Transporting these sacred materials back to Varanasi was a pilgrimage in reverse, each jolt of the cart a source of anxiety for Devendra. He cushioned the wood and the gourd with soft cotton cloths, murmuring reassurances as if to living beings. Back in the familiar confines of the workshop, an almost palpable energy began to crackle. The silence was not banished, but transformed. It became a silence of profound concentration, of sacred endeavor. The rhythmic rasp of Devendra's heavy logging saw as he and Rohan laboriously began to break down the massive toon trunk, the sharper song of the basula adds as Devendra started to rough-hew the shape of the sitar's long neck. The focused hiss of Rohan's smaller plane as he smoothed the plank for the tabli, the faceplate, these were the first notes of the Leela Veena's overture. Devendra worked with a focused intensity that belied his age. His movements were economical, precise, each one the culmination of a lifetime of knowledge. He was a stern taskmaster. His patience for error almost non-existent. "The wood has a will," Rohan," he would exclaim, his voice sharp as a newly honed chisel, if Rohan's stroke was hesitant or ill-judged. "You are not its conqueror. You are its interpreter. Your hand must learn to listen to its story, to follow its grain, not impose your own clumsy narrative upon it." Yet, for all his severity, there was a new element in his teaching. He began to explain the why behind the what. He would pause, pick up Leela's notebook, and read a passage aloud. His voice softening. "Your Didi Leela," he would say, tapping a sketch of a particular type of joint. "She understood that strength and grace must embrace, like Shiva and Parvati. This joint, her design, it is stronger because it is more elegant." See. Rohan, though his muscles ached and his spirit was often bruised by the Ustad's critiques, persevered. He saw the fire in his master's eyes, the almost unbearable tenderness with which he handled the chosen wood. He began to glimpse the enormity of the task, the depth of the love and grief that fueled it. He was no longer just an apprentice. He was a witness, a participant in a sacred act of creation. His own practice on his battered sitar took on a new urgency, a new depth. He was not just learning notes. He was trying to understand the soul of the music that the Leela Veena would one day embody. Current part characters, 4416. Total characters, 19186. The hollowing of the tumba. The gourd resonator, was a process of almost surgical delicacy. Devendra used a series of curved knives and gouges, his touch feather-light, shaving away the inner pith layer by minuscule layer. Constantly tapping the gourd, listening to the subtle changes in its resonant pitch. "Too thick, and the voice is muffled, a prisoner," he explained to Rohan, who watched with rapt attention. "Too thin, and it becomes fragile. Its voice shallow, easily broken. It must be like the human heart, Rohan, strong enough to endure, yet sensitive enough to feel every vibration of life." The long neck, the dandi, was shaped from a single, flawless piece of the divine tune, its grain flowing like frozen music. Devendra spent days sighting along its length, ensuring its perfect straightness, its subtle taper. He carved the headstock, Leela's unfurling lotus bud, with a love that was almost painful to behold. Each petal, each delicate vein, seemed to emerge from the wood as if summoned by her memory. He worked often late into the night, by the warm, flickering glow of a single mustard oil lamp, the city's raucous nightlife a distant, irrelevant murmur. In these quiet hours, he would sometimes speak to the wood, to Leela. "Are you pleased, my little lotus?" he would whisper, his fingers tracing the curve of a petal. "Will this be a fitting voice for your songs?" It was during one of these nocturnal vigils, as Devendra was meticulously fitting a reinforcing strip of wood inside the tumba, his brow furrowed in concentration, that Mr. Alastair Finch, the new British colonial administrator for the district, made his first, unannounced appearance. Finch, a man in his early 40s, possessed a lean, academic build, a sharp, inquisitive nose, and a pair of spectacles that seemed to magnify not just his vision, but also his sense of intellectual superiority. He cultivated an air of the benevolent scholar, the enlightened Englishman genuinely fascinated by the exotic curiosities of the Raj. His true passion, however, lay in collection, in the cataloguing and acquisition of what he termed significant cultural artifacts, preferably for institutions back in England that would reflect well upon his discernment and his service to the empire. He had heard whispers in the Chowk, and from his network of local informants, of an old sitar maestro, one Devendra Mishra, who, after a long period of inactivity following a family tragedy, had embarked upon the creation of a truly exceptional instrument. A tribute sitar, some called it, already imbued with a certain mystique. Such a piece, Finch mused, would be a splendid addition to his burgeoning portfolio, a highlight for the upcoming Grand Imperial Exhibition in Calcutta. He found Devendra's workshop tucked away in a narrow, dimly lit alley, its entrance unassuming. He stepped inside without knocking, his presence immediately altering the workshop's atmosphere. Introducing a note of crisp, foreign efficiency into its timeless, almost sacred, disarray. Ustad Devendra Mishra, Finch inquired, his Hindi precise, his tone a careful blend of respect and authority. Forgive my intrusion at this late hour. I am Alastair Finch. Recently appointed to the district. I have been given to understand that you are engaged in a rather remarkable undertaking. Current part characters, 3670. Total characters, 22856. Devendra slowly straightened from his work, his back stiff. He blinked, his eyes adjusting from the focused lamplight to the shadowed figure in the doorway. He recognized the attire, the stance, the accent, another Englishman. Another official. He offered a brief, non-committal namaste, his expression guarded. Rohan, who had been dozing lightly in a corner after a long day of sanding, started awake. Instantly alert to the change in his ustad's demeanor and the presence of a stranger. Finch's eyes, sharp and analytical, swept around the workshop, taking in the tools, the stacked wood, the various sitars in states of assembly and disrepair, before finally settling on the gleaming pale gourd of the Leela Veena resting on Devendra's workbench. Even in its nascent state, its neck only partially attached, its raw wood unadorned, there was an undeniable aura about it. A sense of proportion, of latent power. Ah, Finch breathed, a genuine note of appreciation in his voice, though it was the appreciation of a connoisseur for a rare object rather than an artist for a kindred spirit. This must be it. The instrument of mourning, is it not, or perhaps, of remembrance? He stepped closer, his gaze intense. Extraordinary. The quality of the gourd alone is exceptional. And this tune would. I can almost feel its resonance. He made a move as if to touch it, but Devendra, with a subtle shift of his body, interposed himself. It is not yet an instrument, Sahib, Devendra said, his voice low and gravelly. It is a work in progress. A personal matter. Indeed, indeed, Finch replied smoothly, his eyes still fixed on the sitar. But all great art, Ustad Ji, eventually transcends the personal, does it not? It becomes a part of a larger heritage. A gift to the world. I am, in my humble capacity, involved in assembling a collection of the finest examples of Indian artistry for a rather significant exhibition. A piece such as this, imbued not only with masterly craftsmanship but also with such a poignant narrative. It would be a centerpiece. It would ensure your legacy, and that of your loss, is recognized and honored far beyond these walls. He paused, allowing the implication of imperial patronage to settle. The crown is always eager to acknowledge and reward true genius among its subjects. Devendra felt a cold wave of revulsion. Legacy, renown, reward, this Englishman, with his polite, predatory words, was trying to reduce the Leela Veena, his sacred communion with his daughter's spirit, into a catalogued artifact, a colonial trophy. He thought of Leela's lotus bud, her desire for a voice for the soul's unspoken music. That voice would not be bartered for imperial favor. This sitar, Sahib, Devendra stated, his voice acquiring a quiet dignity that was more formidable than any shout, is not for any exhibition. It is not for any stage. Save perhaps the stage of memory. Its music is intended for an audience of one, who is no longer here to listen in the way of the world, but who, I pray, will hear it nonetheless. Finch's thin lips curved into a smile that did not reach his eyes. A most touching sentiment, Ustad Ji. Very poetic. But such dedication also deserves tangible recognition. We are prepared to offer a very generous sum, a sum that would ensure your comfort in your later years, and perhaps even allow you to take on more apprentices, to further disseminate your invaluable skills. He gestured vaguely around the humble workshop. Surely, such talent deserves more than this. Current part characters, 3,800. Total characters, 26656. Rohan, listening from the shadows, felt his fists clench.